Iran has set a trap, and right now, in this moment, not even Iran can fully disarm it. That is not a metaphor. That is not speculation. That is operational reality. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow corridor of water barely 21 miles wide at its tightest point, carries 20% of all the oil traded on Earth every single day. And Iran has spent the last 4 decades building the military capability, planting the mines, positioning the fast boats, and deploying the missiles to shut it down in hours. Not days, hours. The question the world is asking right now is whether Iran will actually do it. But that is the wrong question. The right question is this. Does it matter if Iran intends to close the strait, if the threat alone is already doing the damage? For ordinary people watching this, for the family in Jakarta who can't find fuel for their motorbike, for the factory worker in Seoul watching their plant slow to a crawl, for the pensioner in Birmingham watching their energy bill climb month after month. This is not an abstract geopolitical dispute. This is your life, your costs, your future. And it is being determined right now by what happens inside a 21-mile channel of water between Iran and Oman. If you want analysis that actually explains what is happening and why it matters to you, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Let's start with what we actually know. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. That is the distance between 2 mid-sized American cities, close enough to see across on a clear day. Through that 21-mile gap, somewhere between 17 and 20 million barrels of oil pass every single day. That's roughly 1 in every 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on Earth. Saudi Arabia's exports go through it, Iraq's go through it, Kuwait's, the UAE's, Qatar's, all of them every day through that same 21 miles of water. Now here's the critical statistic. If that strait were closed for 6 months, not permanently, not forever, just 6 months. The International Energy Agency estimates that the disruption to global oil markets would be more severe than anything the world has experienced since the 1973 oil embargo. And the 1973 oil embargo, which reduced global supply by just 7%, triggered the worst economic recession in the United States since the Great Depression of the 1930s. 7%. Iran controls a choke point through which 20% flows. Let that land for a moment. And this is not a new vulnerability. In 1988, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine in the Persian Gulf. The explosion nearly sank the ship, wounded 10 sailors, and triggered Operation Praying Mantis, the largest surface naval battle the United States had fought since World War II. The mines were not sophisticated. They were old, they were cheap, and they almost killed an American warship. Iran has known this for 40 years. The Strait of Hormuz is not a vulnerability Iran discovered recently. It is the foundation of its entire strategic doctrine. Every Iranian military planner, every Revolutionary Guard commander, every political decision maker in Tehran has understood for 4 decades that their greatest asymmetric weapon is not a nuclear bomb or a ballistic missile. It is that 21-mile channel of water. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Iran has spent those 4 decades preparing to use it. Layer 1, the technical reality. The Strait of Hormuz has 2 shipping lanes, each just 2 miles wide, with a 2-mile buffer zone between them. 2 miles. In naval terms, that is not a shipping lane. It is a firing range. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps naval force has spent 40 years rehearsing exactly how to control those lanes. They have fast attack craft, small agile speedboats that can swarm a supertanker or naval vessel from multiple directions simultaneously. They have anti-ship missiles positioned in hardened coastal positions on both the Iranian mainland and on islands inside the strait. They have submarine capability, limited but real. And they have mines, thousands of them, stockpiled, ready to be deployed. The mines are the part that most analysts underestimate. Modern naval mines are not the simple contact-triggered devices of World War I. Iranian mines include pressure-activated variants, magnetic influence variants, and acoustic-triggered variants. They can be set to activate only after a certain number of ships pass over them, making minesweeping extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming. According to naval analysts cited by Bloomberg, clearing the Strait of Hormuz of a full Iranian minefield would take a minimum of 6 months, even with the full minesweeping capacity of the U.S. Navy and its allies. 6 months, not 6 days, not 6 weeks, 6 months. And this is where things get worse. Layer 2. The capability gap. The United States Navy is the most powerful naval force on Earth. 11 aircraft carrier strike groups, hundreds of ships, the most advanced naval technology in human history. And in open water, in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in the deep ocean, that power is decisive and overwhelming. But the Strait of Hormuz is not open water. It is a narrow, shallow, coastal body of water surrounded by hostile territory on one side. And in that environment, the calculus changes completely. Iran does not need to defeat the US Navy. That would be impossible. What Iran needs to do is make the cost of keeping the strait open higher than the cost of negotiating. And in a narrow coastal waterway, small, fast, cheap, asymmetric weapons, speedboats, mines, anti-ship missiles can impose enormous costs on even the most technologically advanced naval force in the world. Here's the comparison the US military does not advertise. America has 11 carrier strike groups to Iran's 2 minesweepers, officially assigned to Hormuz operations. But in a minefield environment, aircraft carriers are not the relevant asset. Minesweepers are. And America has far fewer of those than the task demands. The capability gap that matters in the Strait of Hormuz is not the gap between American and Iranian naval power overall. It is the specific gap between Iran's mining capability and the allied world's mine-sweeping capacity. That's the asymmetry. Layer 3, the hidden variable. Here is a piece of information that most mainstream coverage of the Strait of Hormuz situation is not adequately conveying. Iran does not need to fully close the strait to win. Partial disruption, the threat of mines, the harassment of tankers, the occasional seizure of a vessel is enough to trigger a risk premium in oil markets that functions as a tax on every barrel passing through. Lloyd's of London, the global insurance market whose war risk ratings determine the cost of shipping in conflict zones, has already dramatically increased the premiums charged for vessels transiting the Persian Gulf. These increases are not small. Shipping companies have reported war risk surcharges that add millions of dollars per voyage to operating costs. Those costs are passed on to the buyers of the oil. Those buyers pass them on to consumers. And the consumer, 6 supply chain steps removed from the Strait of Hormuz, sees it arrive as a higher energy bill, a higher petrol price, a higher cost for every manufactured product that required energy to make. This is the hidden variable. Iran doesn't need to fire a single mine to impose costs. The credible threat alone is doing the work, and here's where everything connects. Layer 4, the loss of control problem. This is the most serious and least discussed escalation risk of the entire situation. Iran cannot fully open the Strait of Hormuz, even if it wants to. Here is what that means. The Strait of Hormuz is not solely controlled by the Iranian state. The Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, operates with significant autonomy inside Iranian military doctrine. IRGC commanders in the strait are not always waiting for orders from Tehran before acting. There have been documented incidents of IRGC naval forces seizing tankers, harassing vessels, and firing warning shots without prior authorization from the political leadership. Reports from Reuters and the Wall Street Journal have confirmed that during periods of heightened tension, IRGC naval commanders in the Persian Gulf have significant operational latitude. Which means that even if a political decision is made at the highest levels of the Iranian government to de-escalate, to stand down, to allow free navigation, that decision may not be fully executable in the hours that matter most. The mechanism for closure is easier to trigger than the mechanism for reopening. And once a tanker is hit, once a mine detonates under a hull, once oil is burning on the surface of the Strait of Hormuz, the political and economic cascade that follows is no longer under anyone's control. That is the trap, not just for the world, for Iran too. So what are the options? Option 1, Military deterrence. The United States surges naval assets into the region, demonstrates overwhelming force, and signals to Iran that any attempt to close the strait will be met with devastating military response. This sounds logical until you remember that Iran's strategic deterrent in the strait is not its conventional military. It is its mining capability and asymmetric harassment capacity. Military deterrence works when the opponent is trying to match your conventional power. It is less effective when the opponent's weapon is a $10,000 mine deployed at night from a small boat. Option 2. Economic pressure. Escalate sanctions until Iran's economic pain exceeds the strategic value of controlling the strait. This sounds logical until you remember that Iran has been under severe sanctions for over 40 years and has built its entire political and military strategy around surviving them. Iran's economy is damaged. It is not broken. And the political class that makes decisions about the strait has demonstrated repeatedly that it prioritizes strategic positioning over economic relief. Option 3, diplomatic negotiation, a new framework agreement that guarantees Iran's security and economic integration in exchange for renouncing the Hormuz threat. This sounds logical until you remember that every previous diplomatic framework, including the JCPOA in 2018, has collapsed under domestic political pressure in both Washington and Tehran. The trust deficit between these two parties is now measured in decades, not disagreements. Option 4. Alternative routing. Accelerate pipeline infrastructure that bypasses the strait entirely, routing Gulf oil overland through Saudi Arabia and the UAE to Red Sea terminals. This is already partially underway. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline has capacity. The UAE's Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline bypasses the strait. This sounds logical until you remember that these pipelines together can handle roughly 4 to 5 million barrels per day. The strait handles 17 to 20 million barrels per day. You cannot bypass your way out of this problem with infrastructure that exists today. Option 5. The option nobody wants to say out loud. The only complete solution to the Hormuz vulnerability is the elimination of the Iranian state's ability to threaten it, which means a military campaign of sufficient scale and duration to destroy Iran's coastal defense infrastructure, its mining stockpiles, its IRGC naval capacity, and the political will to use them. The military planners know this. The political leaders know this. And the reason it isn't happening is that the cost of that campaign in lives, in money, in regional destabilization, in the global economic shock of fighting a war inside the world's most important oil corridor, is a cost that no government has yet decided to pay. None of the 5 options are good. That is not a rhetorical flourish. That is the structural reality. So let us zoom out from the immediate crisis to the system that produced it. The Strait of Hormuz vulnerability is not a geopolitical accident. It is the direct consequence of a failed assumption that has sat at the center of global energy policy for 50 years. That assumption was this: that the combination of American military power, Gulf state political stability, and global economic interdependence would be sufficient to permanently guarantee the free flow of energy through the world's most critical waterway. That assumption has failed. Not partially failed, structurally failed. American military power is real, but not decisive in coastal asymmetric warfare. Gulf state political stability has proven fragile under sustained military and economic pressure. And global economic interdependence, the theory that no major power would risk the global economic disruption of closing the strait on dam or bam or sosentam after ice or has been tested against a political leadership in Tehran that has demonstrated consistently that it values strategic leverage over economic integration. This is not a contained regional incident. It is a structural revelation. The architecture of global energy security, the entire post-1973 framework of American guarantees, petrodollar recycling, and Gulf state cooperation is being stress-tested against a threat it was not designed to handle. A non-state adjacent actor with 40 years of preparation, asymmetric capability, and nothing left to lose. And the nations that built their entire economic models on the assumption that cheap Gulf energy would always flow freely. China, Japan, South Korea, India, much of Southeast Asia, and Europe. Are now facing a strategic reckoning they have no good answer to. The cheap energy era is ending, not because the oil ran out, because the 21-mile channel that carries it can no longer be guaranteed safe. Here is where things stand right now. Iranian naval forces remain positioned throughout the Persian Gulf and at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. IRGC speedboat harassment of commercial vessels continues. War risk insurance premiums remain at elevated levels. Major shipping companies are rerouting some cargoes around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 10 to 14 days to transit time and significant cost. Rather than risk Hormuz passage. The questions the world does not yet have answers to are the ones that matter most. If a mine detonates under a tanker in the next 72 hours, who responds, how fast, and does that response trigger the broader escalation that everyone says they want to avoid? If oil prices spike above $130 per barrel and stay there for 60 days, which governments collapse under the economic pressure, and do those collapses create more instability than the original crisis? If Iran's political leadership decides to de-escalate, can they actually deliver that de-escalation given the operational autonomy of IRGC commanders inside the strait? Or is the mechanism for opening the strait slower and less reliable than the mechanism for closing it? And the deepest question of all, if the world's most powerful navy cannot guarantee the security of the world's most important oil corridor, what does global energy security actually look like in the decades ahead? Who provides that guarantee? How is it enforced? And at what cost? Stay with this channel because this story is not over. It is barely beginning. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide, and right now the entire global economic order is squeezing through it. Perspective road composition leading toward a narrow strait of dark ocean water framed by desert cliffs on both sides. A massive oil supertanker visible in the channel. Dramatic red and orange cinematic sky. Bold all caps, white text, oil lifeline under threat with Hormuz in red accent. Prominent US flag in the foreground corner. Photorealistic AI render style. US rural Midwest road in the immediate foreground transitioning to the Persian Gulf scene. Dramatic cinematic lighting with God rays cutting through a tense, smoky atmosphere.